Montana farmers are voicing frustrations over the Trump administration's use of tariffs. During a press briefing, farmers and ranchers highlighted what tariffs are doing to their livelihood. NBC Montana's Bowen West joined the hearing and breaks it down.
It began with a headline that shook the heartland. Trump rages as Canada imposes 8B tariff on U.S. wheat. Midwest farmers in shock. At first, many assumed it was more political posturing, another volley in the ongoing tariff wars that had already defined Trump's economic agenda. But this time, the story was real. Canada, long considered America's most reliable trading partner, had retaliated against a new round of U.S. tariffs. The response wasn't symbolic or cautious. It was targeted, strategic, and devastating. An $8 billion tariff focused squarely on the very crop that defines American agriculture, wheat. For decades, the United States and Canada operated as partners in one of the most stable agricultural relationships on Earth. From the plains of Kansas to the fields of Saskatchewan, farmers on both sides of the border shared not only weather patterns, but trade routes, storage hubs, and supply chains. Wheat flowed north and south, across rail lines and highways, processed and exported through shared systems. But the balance began to crack when Washington reignited its protectionist agenda. Tariffs on Canadian steel, lumber, and dairy reignited old wounds. Ottawa warned repeatedly that it would not remain silent if the U.S. weaponized trade. When new U.S. tariffs took effect in early spring, Canada's patience snapped. At a hastily arranged press conference, the Canadian finance minister declared a firm and proportionate response: an $8 billion tariff on U.S. wheat and grain imports. The reaction was immediate. Commodity markets convulsed. Wheat futures in Chicago fell nearly 9% by day's end, a freefall not seen since the 2008 global financial crisis. Traders called it a shockwave through the grain belt. Across the Midwest, farmers woke to canceled orders, halted contracts, and chaos. Trucks lined up for miles at northern checkpoints as border agents enforced new import duties. Shipments that had been days away from delivery suddenly faced insurmountable costs. The Department of Agriculture scrambled to calculate losses, while the White House convened emergency meetings. Sources inside reported that Trump exploded during the briefing, calling the Canadian move a betrayal by a country that owes everything to us. The Midwest took the hit first. Wheat isn't just a crop there. It's culture, identity, and lifeblood. Generations of families have tilled the same land, feeding the world through endless seasons of sun and frost. Now, that legacy stood under threat. Much of America's wheat exports rely on Canadian transit routes, rail lines leading to Vancouver or Thunder Bay, ports shared under long-standing logistical agreements. The new tariff disrupted it all. Farmers couldn't get their crops north, mills couldn't fill contracts, exporters couldn't guarantee delivery. Within a week, wheat prices at local co-ops had fallen to levels unseen in 15 years. In Ottawa, officials justified their move as reluctant but necessary. "We did not start this trade war," one minister declared, "but we will defend Canadian farmers from unfair U.S. aggression." Still, beneath the patriotic rhetoric was frustration that had been building for years. The U.S. had imposed tariffs on softwood lumber, aluminum, and dairy, each blow framed as protecting American jobs, each one deepening resentment north of the border. The wheat tariff was payback, but it was also a statement of independence. Canada would not remain Washington's economic understudy. Economists immediately pointed out that the $8 billion figure wasn't just economic, it was symbolic. By striking wheat, Canada targeted the Midwest, Trump's political stronghold. The move cut deep into his base of loyal voters, the farmers who helped carry him to power. Within hours, cameras captured the president pacing in the Oval Office, visibly enraged. "They're stabbing us in the back," he fumed, according to one aide. "We saved their industries, and this is how they repay us." By evening, hashtags like Wheat War and Farm Crisis 2825 were trending. On the ground, panic spread. In places like Dodge City, Kansas, and Fargo, North Dakota, farmers held emergency meetings in local co-ops. Many had just secured loans for the planting season. Now their buyers had vanished. "We're not politicians," said one farmer on live TV. "We're providers, and right now, nobody's buying what we provide." By the end of the month, grain elevators were full, storage costs soared, and rural banks began warning of defaults. Economists predicted that if the tariffs persisted beyond harvest, Up to 40,000 American farms could face insolvency within a year. The White House scrambled for damage control. Trump announced a $4 billion aid package, promising to make our farmers whole again. It was meant to reassure, but it sparked mixed reactions. Critics accused the administration of handing out temporary relief for a self-inflicted crisis. Others feared it was too little, too late. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a televised address hailing Canadian resolve. Canada will not yield to intimidation, he declared. We stand with our farmers. His approval ratings surged at home, even as business leaders warned that a prolonged conflict could choke Canada's manufacturing and raise consumer prices. Summer brought no peace. With the tariff in full effect, American wheat prices continued to collapse. Across the Midwest, protests grew. Farmers carried signs reading, "We feed the world. Don't starve us for votes." State governors from both parties pleaded with Washington to find a solution, but Trump refused to back down. Instead, he doubled tariffs on Canadian manufactured goods, declaring that two can play this game. Ottawa retaliated again, imposing stricter border checks and expanding tariffs to corn and soy exports. What had begun as a single tariff had spiraled into a continental trade war. Abroad, markets adjusted quickly. Asian and European buyers pivoted to Canada and Australia for wheat supply. U.S. exporters lost contracts overnight. Analysts called it the sharpest loss of global market share in U.S. agricultural history. Inside the administration, the mood darkened. The Secretary of Agriculture privately warned that the Farm Belt was collapsing under the weight of pride and politics. Mental health hotlines in rural states saw record spikes. Families who had worked the same soil for generations faced foreclosure. By late July, secret talks began. Diplomats from both nations met quietly in Geneva to discuss a compromise. Canada would lift the wheat tariff if Washington removed duties on steel and aluminum. For a moment, hope flickered. But then came another Trump tweet. "Canada is lucky America lets it exist." The insult enraged Ottawa, derailing negotiations overnight. Canadian media called it the tweet heard across the plains. The talks collapsed. By harvest season, the damage was irreversible. Golden fields stretched across the Midwest, yet much of the grain had nowhere to go. Silos overflowed. Rail cars stood idle, and tens of thousands of tons of wheat rotted in the open air. Farmers began dumping grain in protest, a visual cry for help broadcast across networks worldwide. Economists compared the collapse to the Dust Bowl, not from drought, but from policy. Canada, too, began feeling the blowback. Inflation rose, exports to the U.S. fell, and political pressure mounted on Carney's administration. Yet both leaders refused to blink. Trump's rallies turned defiance into theater. They thought they could break the American farmer, he declared before roaring crowds, but we will rise stronger than ever. In Ottawa, Carney countered with calm resolve, presenting himself as the voice of reason against U.S. chaos. For both men, the conflict had become personal, no longer about tariffs, but about power, pride, and image. Economists estimated combined damages exceeding $60 billion across North America. The world's most stable trade relationship had become a battlefield. By autumn, exhaustion set in. American farmers were buried under debt and unsold crops. Canadian exporters faced shortages and price surges. The agricultural alliance that fed millions had turned into a cautionary tale. Even as quiet negotiations resumed behind the scenes, the trust between the two countries seemed broken beyond repair. The $8 billion wheat tariff will likely be remembered as a symbol of how fragile alliances can crumble under the weight of ego. It revealed how nationalism, when weaponized, can devastate the very people it claims to protect. The Midwest's rolling plains, once symbols of abundance, now stand as silent reminders of that arrogance. As winter approaches, the winds sweep over empty fields and rusting silos. The wheat still grows, but the friendship that once linked two nations has withered. What began as an argument over trade has become a story about pride, politics, and the cost of power. America and Canada, two countries that once shared harvests, now share blame. And for the farmers who lost everything, the question that lingers in the cold air is simple: who really won?